Welcome back to the pod and the page. Here on the Last Highlight YouTube channel, this is our fifth episode, episode 5. And today we're really getting into a book that's, well, it's fascinating, but definitely unsettling. It's Without Conscience by Robert D. Hare. It's this deep look into people who just operate without empathy, without remorse. It's quite chilling, actually. Our goal here, our mission, if you like, is to pull out the really key stuff from the book for you. Kind of a shortcut to understanding this personality type, which honestly is way more common than you might think, and the impact, well, it can be devastating. There was this one quote, it really jumped out at us. We even put it in the thumbnail for this video. It goes, "Psychopaths have what it takes to defraud and bilk others. They are fast-talking, charming, self-assured, at ease in social situations, cool under pressure, unfazed by the possibility of being found out, and totally ruthless." Pretty stark, right? And just quickly, we grabbed that quote using Readwise. It's this really handy app, especially if you read ebooks. Lets you save highlights and then resurfaces them later. Super useful. Definitely check it out if that sounds like your thing. There's a link down in the video description. Okay, so let's dive in. First off, who exactly are we talking about when we say psychopath? The book starts with a pretty blunt definition. It calls them social predators. People who charm, manipulate, just plow through life, leaving this wake of, broken hearts, broken promises, empty bank accounts. And the kicker is they do it without a conscience, without real feelings for anyone else. And it's so, so important to understand right off the bat. Psychopathy is a personality disorder. It's not the same as being legally insane or having psychosis. That's a really common mix-up. Sure, a lot of psychopaths end up in the criminal justice system, but Hare makes a huge point that many, maybe even most, don't. They're out there using that charm, that manipulation, causing incredible damage without, necessarily committing crimes that lead to prison. Understanding that difference is key because it changes how we think about dealing with them and, honestly, how likely you are to run into someone like this.
Right, and that's the really sobering part of the book, isn't it? The personal relevance. It suggests it's not really if you'll encounter someone like this, but more like when. So knowing the signs, knowing how to protect yourself financially, emotionally, even physically, it becomes, well, pretty crucial information. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Hare himself, his journey into this started somewhat unexpectedly. He was doing research and found these really unusual brainwave patterns in some of his subjects. That discovery basically kicked off this decades-long quest for him, like 25 years, trying to figure out what makes these people tick. They seemed normal on the surface, but something was clearly very different underneath.
Which leads to the big question, how do you even diagnose something like this? Especially when deception is like part of the package. The book points out that standard psych tests, the ones where people talk about themselves, are basically useless with psychopaths. Can you elaborate on why? And maybe share that crazy story about the inmate running a consulting service.
Yeah, it's because lying, manipulation, putting on a show, it's fundamental to the disorder itself. You just can't trust what they say about themselves. They know what sounds good, what people want to hear. The book gives this brilliant example, an inmate who was literally teaching other prisoners how to fake the results on psychological tests.
No way.
Yeah, seriously. How to get classified a certain way, maybe get a transfer, or even how to fake symptoms to get medication like Valium they could then sell inside. And there's another guy Hare mentions who had, get this, 3 completely different profiles on the MMPI test, depending on what he wanted to achieve at that moment. Masters of impression management, as Hare calls them. So, yeah, because of all that, the traditional methods just didn't work. And that's what led Hare and his colleagues to develop the psychopathy checklist, the PCL. It took over 10 years of really careful work refining it. Now, it's considered a very reliable tool, especially in forensic settings. It doesn't just rely on what they say. It combines interviews with detailed file information looking for a consistent pattern. But, and this is critical, a diagnosis isn't just about ticking a few boxes. Someone has to match the complete profile. It's a whole picture, not just isolated traits.
Okay, that makes sense. So with that checklist in mind, let's break down some of those key traits. What's usually the first thing someone might notice, according to the book?
Often, the very first thing, and it's incredibly deceptive, is this glibness, this superficial charm. They can be really witty, good conversationalists, entertaining, likable even. They're great at making a good first impression. But, as the book notes, people who are a bit more discerning might pick up on something off, like it's too slick, or maybe feels a bit like they're acting, playing a role rather than being genuine.
Yeah, I remember that example from Truman Capote's in Cold Blood, Dick Hickok just effortlessly charming the clerk. Or that teacher, William Bradfield, the book said he had a great opening line for anything, but no depth beyond that.
Exactly. It's like they've memorized the lines but don't understand the play. And right alongside that charm, you get this huge sense of egocentricity and grandiosity. They have this massively inflated view of themselves, their abilities, their importance, just this unwavering belief in their own greatness. Hare tells this story about an inmate rating himself, saying, I'm an all-round 10, and then adding something like, I'd say 12, but that would be bragging, that kind of thing. It often leads them to do ridiculous things like firing their lawyers because they think they can do better themselves. Usually ends badly, of course.
And then we get to what's maybe the most disturbing part, that complete lack of remorse or guilt. It's described as just this stunning indifference to the pain and chaos they cause. They don't just hide it, they often seem genuinely baffled that anyone would expect them to feel bad.
It manifests as pure callousness. There's one example in the book, a guy who stabbed someone during a robbery. The victim was hospitalized for months. His reaction, get real. He spends a few months in hospital. I rot here. He even said he gave him a break by not slitting his throat.
Wow.
Yeah. Or Jack Abbott, the writer who killed a waiter, and his main concern seemed to be that it was a clean wound and the victim wasn't going to be a great actor anyway. Even someone like John Wayne Gacy, after murdering over 30 young men, consistently painted himself as the real victim, the 34th victim. It's not just that they don't feel guilt. It's like the whole mechanism for feeling it is missing.
Which seems directly linked to what Hare calls their shallow emotions and profound lack of empathy. It's like an emotional poverty, right? Love might just mean sexual arousal to them. Sadness is maybe just frustration at not getting their way.
Precisely. This inability to grasp, let alone share others' feelings, leads to that baffling callousness. Ted Bundy calling himself the most cold-blooded son of a bitch you'll ever meet. For Diane Downs, after shooting her kids, her main focus seemed to be on her own minor arm injury. She saw herself as the victim. Hare even mentions a rapist who found his victim's terror not unpleasant. It's this view of people as well as objects, pawns to be used. And if you're weak or vulnerable, you're just a sucker in their eyes. That emotional void is what lets them operate without the brakes most of us have.
Given all that, it probably shouldn't be a surprise that lying and manipulation are like second nature to them. The book says they're unfazed by the possibility of being found out, even when caught red-handed.
Yeah, they rarely get flustered. If caught in a lie, they just switch gears, change the story, try to twist the facts, maybe blame someone else. It's seamless for them. There's an anecdote about a woman who explained her technique as salting the mind, throwing in a little bit of truth to make the whole fabricated story seem believable. And that story about the 24-year-old, so charismatic, described being a pilot at 11, a deep-sea diver, a rancher, all complete fiction, but told so convincingly. It comes back to their worldview. It's just givers and takers. And they are definitely the takers. They think everyone's manipulating everyone else. They just happen to be better at it.
Okay, so shifting from those core personality traits, let's talk about their lifestyle. The behavioral patterns. The book paints a picture of instability and often antisocial behavior.
A big one is impulsivity. They just don't seem to think things through, weigh the pros and cons. It's very much act first, think later, if at all. Driven by whatever whim hits them at the moment. Remember Gary Gilmore? The guy who basically demanded to be executed? He said, I wasn't thinking, I wasn't planning, I was just doing. That sums it up pretty well. Hare also tells this story about a psychopath's wife. They're eating dinner. She just gets up from the table, walks out, and her husband doesn't see her again for 2 months. No warning, no explanation, just gone.
Wow. And feeling that impulsivity, there's this constant need for excitement, right? They get bored incredibly easily.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They crave novelty, thrills, the buzz. That's why they often jump from job to job, relationship to relationship, place to place. Routine is like poison to them. The book mentions a teenager playing chicken with freight trains just for the rush, or another guy who got a high from smuggling drugs through airports. The flip side is this profound inability to tolerate anything monotonous or predictable. Stability just isn't in their vocabulary. And that ties directly into irresponsible behavior. It's not just occasional slip-ups. It's a pervasive pattern of neglecting duties, promises, obligations, financial, social, familial, you name it. Diane Downs, again, is cited for consistently neglecting her kids, leaving them hungry and alone. Hare also mentions a physician's concern about HIV-positive psychopaths just continuing to have unprotected sex, utterly indifferent to the potential consequences for their partners. Their own immediate desires trump everything else.
And it's chilling to read that these patterns often start really young. The book talks about early antisocial behavior, even in childhood. A key marker seems to be cruelty to animals.
Yes, that comes up frequently, and it's often described very matter-of-factly, which is disturbing in itself, like the guy who chuckled remembering shitting a neighbor's dog with a pellet gun when he was 10 because it was irritating. Or another who casually talked about batting a cat around a pole with a tennis racket. It's not just kids being mischievous, it's an early sign of that fundamental lack of empathy and disregard for suffering.
And this often progresses into adulthood as criminal versatility. They don't tend to specialize in one type of crime, do they? Their records often cover a huge range.
Exactly. They're often involved in all sorts of things: fraud, theft, assault, parole violations, you name it. It's not usually strategic, it's opportunistic. G. Daniel Walker, that criminal Hare mentions, actually bragged about his rap sheet being 29 or 30 pages long. He contrasted it with Charles Manson's, which was only 5 pages, saying he was more versatile. It shows that disregard for any rules, really, whatever serves the moment.
Which brings us right to the core issue, what the book calls the missing piece, that fundamental lack of internal controls, of conscience. That story about Elise and Jeffries just it really captures it. How he charmed her, manipulated her, how she described him cannibalizing her life while making her laugh, and how the rules just didn't apply to him like they were written in pencil, and he had a big eraser. Even after everything prison, hitting on her roommates, stealing, dealing drugs, she still found it hard to see him clearly. It was only when others, like her parents, who weren't taken in by the charm, pointed things out. And that moment when her brother caught him grabbing her and Jeffrey just instantly switched, became calm and reasonable. It's like flipping a switch, putting on a mask.
That story perfectly illustrates the whole mad versus bad thing Hare discusses. He's very clear. Psychopaths aren't mad in the legal or psychiatric sense. They know the rules of society. They understand right from wrong intellectually. They can control their behavior when it suits them. The problem isn't a lack of understanding the rules. It's the lack of the emotional underpinning. They don't feel the reasons why those rules exist, the emotional consequences, the empathy, the guilt. That's the missing piece. They get the dictionary definition, but not the emotional weight.
Which is maybe why popular culture gets it wrong so often. We get these larger-than-life figures like Hannibal Lecter, brilliant, maybe, but also these gruesome serial killers. The book argues that's not typical. Most psychopaths aren't motivated by complex evil plans. It's much more mundane, isn't it? Just egocentricity, whim, and the promise of instant gratification. We're probably more likely to lose our savings to one than our life.
That's a really important distinction. And the book goes into some fascinating research about how their brains might process language differently. There's a suggestion it might be more bilateral, using both hemispheres in a way that's unusual for processing emotional language. This could lead to what Hare calls hollow words. They might hear or use emotionally charged words like death or love, but process them almost like neutral words, like table or paper. There's no emotional resonance, no coloring. That might explain how they can say contradictory things without batting an eye, like saying I love you right after being abusive, or stealing from family while expressing concern for them. There's no internal conflict because the emotional weight of the words just isn't there for them.
So moving from the individual to the bigger picture, the book addresses the societal impact and the ethics of labeling. Using the PCL is powerful, especially in the justice system for predicting risk, but it carries no responsibility.
Absolutely. And misuse can be disastrous. Hare gives the chilling example of Dr. Death, James Grigson in Texas. This psychiatrist would testify, often without even meeting the defendant, that they were a severe sociopath guaranteed to kill again, influencing death penalty sentences. That's the danger of misapplication. But then, used correctly, it could potentially save lives. He contrasts Grigson with the case of Carl Wayne Bunchen, whose repeated parole violations indicative of psychopathy weren't properly assessed. A PCL assessment might have predicted his danger, potentially preventing the murder of a police officer later on. So accurate diagnosis matters hugely.
Given how deep-seated this is, it's pretty bleak when the book states that essentially no effective treatment has been found. Worse, that therapy can sometimes act like a finishing school, teaching them new excuses, better manipulation tactics, like learning to say, oh, I was abused as a child, or I need to get in touch with my feelings, but just using it as another tool. That sounds almost counterproductive.
It's a huge, huge challenge. Traditional therapy often relies on empathy, introspection, guilt, the very things they lack. So yeah, it can backfire. They learn the jargon, learn how to sound like they're improving, which can make them even more dangerous. Recognizing this, Hare actually worked with the Canadian government on a program trying a different approach, not trying to build a conscience, but trying to convince psychopaths that their destructive behavior isn't actually in their own best long-term interest. It involves very strict supervision and focuses on consequences for them. The book is realistic results are likely to be modest, but maybe it's better than doing nothing, or worse, inadvertently making them better manipulators.
Okay, so wrapping this up, the big question for anyone listening has to be, what can I do? How do I protect myself? Thankfully, the book offers some practical advice, a kind of survival guide.
It does. And the first point is crucial. Don't be taken in by the props. Don't let dazzling looks or a super confident manner or rapid-fire impressive talk or intense eye contact distract you. These are often tools they use deliberately. Sometimes, Hare suggests, if you feel overwhelmed by the performance, try closing your eyes or looking away and just listen to the actual words being said. See if there's substance behind the style. Those stories about empty eyes may be chilling, but not a reliable diagnostic tool on their own. Watch the behavior over time. Second, don't wear blinkers. Go into new situations, especially relationships or business deals, with your eyes open. Check things out. Verify claims. Don't get swept away by flattery or stories that seem just too perfect. Remember that Chamber of Commerce president who fooled a whole town? It happens. Also, be aware. They often target vulnerability. People who are lonely, maybe recently bereaved, insecure, looking for easy answers. These are prime targets. They're experts at sensing need and exploiting it. And it's worth acknowledging that strange phenomenon, the deadly attraction. Some people are drawn to notorious criminals, the courtroom groupies. The book sees this as a different dynamic, often more about the admirer's own issues than the psychopath's direct manipulation in that specific context. But it speaks to a certain kind of vulnerability. Lastly, watch out for people, maybe even yourselves, who engage in reality distortion, refusing to see they're being manipulated, clinging to a fantasy of the perfect partner despite all evidence. This denial erodes self-worth and keeps people trapped.
And if you realize you're already involved with someone like this, the advice gets tougher, but it's vital. First, don't blame yourself. This is how they operate. With everyone, your personality might influence how they target you, but not that they do. Second, know who the real victim is. Resist wasting sympathy on them. Their pain is usually frustration at being thwarted. Your pain is real damage. Third, you're not alone. Psychopaths live trails of victims. Connecting with others can break the isolation and self-blame. Fourth, be very careful with power struggles. They need control. Direct confrontation can escalate things dangerously, emotionally, or physically. Stand up for your rights, yes, but be strategic and maybe get help. Fifth, set firm boundaries. If you can't cut ties completely, establish clear rules. Maybe all communication in writing. No more loans, no more bailouts, period. And finally, the hardest one sometimes, cut your losses. Recognize when the only way to survive emotionally, financially, or physically is to get out. This often takes planning, legal advice, and support, which leads to the last point. Use support groups, find organizations, especially those familiar with personality disorders. You'll need support. It's likely to be a long, difficult process. Well, thank you for joining us on this pretty intense deep dive into Robert Hare's Without Conscience. It's definitely a book that makes you think and maybe look at the world a little differently.
It really does. And ultimately, that understanding is the best defense you have. Recognizing the patterns, the subtle signs, and hair outlines, it really can help you protect yourself from potentially immense harm. The scary part isn't just that they exist, but thinking about how often we might cross paths with them and not even realize it.
Absolutely. If you found this discussion helpful or insightful, we'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe to the Last Highlight channel. That way you won't miss our next deep dive on the pod and the page. Thanks for listening.